welcome everyone. It's really nice to see all of you and that you would probably like to know a little bit more about the caching in Drupal. I'm Mariusz Andrzejewski. I work as a technical leader in Droptica. Been here for about 5 years, around 10 years in general web development. I'm a certified Drupal developer. I also contribute to some modules. I'm maintainer of a paragraph view mode. Maybe you heard of this particular module. Yeah, I even had a chance once to contribute to a Drupal core. Yeah, so let's go to the cache. We are talking a lot about the cache. It is important, but what we actually know about the cache, if I were to compare it to something from real life, it's like a pre-made pizza. You know, this is convenient these days to buy one just in case. Maybe a friend will pop up, maybe you will get hungry. I know you all just ate your lunch, so you are probably not hungry right now. But yeah, why is it similar? Both actually. We can have it really fast, really quick. It both requires some kind of a warming up. So the pizza, the cache, same. Healthy, pizza is not always healthy. The same goes for a cache. It won't save us from trouble in all of the cases. So it sometimes might not be very good. Both can get expired. Yeah, you can try it after the date of expiration, but yeah, we don't know the outcome. Why should we pay attention to cache? Why is it so important? We can say that it's only saving some sort of a data that we compute. That's all. Yeah. The first important factor is, of course, the performance. So all of us, not only developers, the users expect a very quick access to the application, web application. So this is very crucial. The same goes for scaling. This is more from a business perspective, because paying for hardware can get higher and higher depending on the scale of our application. So if we will be able to reduce like a memory usage, CPU usage, it will save a lot of money. It will force us to go with the standards, because cache is not a solution for a poor implementation. Sometimes it can be just for a workaround, but in general it's not. So it forces us to write a quite good code and use cache whenever it is needed. Of course, the security. In proper caching, in proper implemented caching, can expose sensitive data. I have a situation, it was during the development, so it was not a production, but still we have a demo for a client, and there was an issue with a block which displayed the username, the user email, and so on, and we didn't get the correct caching to that block. And because of that reason, I logged in as one user, I logged out, and I logged in as another user with a different role. And yeah, I saw the email from the previous user. The same goes for surname. So yeah, the security is very important here. And of course, last but not least, cache is sort of difficult to understand. To work with, so it takes time, experience to understand all of the, all of the topics that are related to the caching. If we talk about the cache, it's not like we have only a cache in Drupal. So basically, there are tons of layers on starting from a PHP. So we have some sort of a caching on the PHP level, like OP caching, preloading, JIT. The same goes for a template engine. We are using Twig in Drupal. So in fact, it's not a separate language. It is something that needs to be compiled to PHP anyway. So it has its own caching layer. The database, of course, the queries to the database are also handled by the database engines. They are cached to have a better performance. We have some sort of a data cache that is in Drupal. We are going to talk about it today. And there is also a caching mechanism on the HTTP layer. So we are talking about CDNs, reverse proxies, and so on. Finally, on the user end, we have also a cache that is related to the assets, CSS, JS, and so on. As I said, we are going to talk a little bit about the caching Drupal. So, as a quick reminder, what type of cache do we have? We have basically two modules, internal dynamic page cache, internal page cache. And the last one, it's not really a type, but these are just a bunch of tools, utility tools to manage cache in Drupal. This is called Cache API. But all of these actually are simple store of a key and the value. So if actually both are key value storage, so what's the difference between the cache tags and the cache context in Drupal? So first of all, cache tags are more dedicated for storing things permanently. So for example, we have a node with particular ID. So this is only one variation. We can store data for that node, and that's it. So for example, any anonymous user can see this node exactly the same. So the things changes when we are using the context. These are some sort of a variation of the same one and the same thing, and this depends on many variations. Here is an example of the important fact. The cache context are also kind of a tags, but this tag is generated dynamically. Here you can see an example. So this cache context was actually compiled to be dependent on some sort of a root, the request format, the language, and so on. So as I said, under the hood, basically some sort of a tag. But context can depend on tag, and they actually work together. So there's a synergy between both. The Cache API, this is basically a set of tools, a set of built-in class interfaces that we can use to easily handle cache in Drupal. Actually, Drupal core already take an advantage of that class. So whenever you look into Drupal core code, you will see that they're mainly using these interfaces, classes, and so on. We can, of course, use that particular tools in our custom solutions. This will allow us to avoid direct use of tags, contexts, to know the structure of an array and so on. And of course, it will allow us to easily be dependent on some sort of cache metadata. The first that I'm going to introduce is a cacheable dependency interface. This is very basic, very simple. It provides only the getters, so it will, by using this method, we can easily get the tags, context, max age, and so on. Here we have an example having a file entity all the entities in Drupal are implementing this particular interface, so we can easily take the cache tags. We don't need to know the structure. So it will return probably a file and the file ID, but we can imagine that we will extend the file entity and we'll add something additional, maybe our custom tag, and we don't need to know about it because we will simply use the method, and we will forget to leave that to that particular entity to manage their tags. Very handy. This is something that I always recommend the developers that I am working with. A cacheable metadata class. Developers tend to use, let's say, merge the array manually. They are checking if the tag is in the array, if there are no duplicates, and so on. They are iterating, and I always ask why, because we have such an object. It will allow us to get, set, merge, apply, and so on. So we don't need to know anything about the hash cache, the subkeys like tags, context, and so on, because we can simply, this is example of a render array. We have a build. We can pass that build through a method, and it simply collects that cache metadata. It is now aware of that. And we can have a bunch of objects, like in this example is a group content, some sort of a configuration. As you can see, we are only invoking the method add cacheable dependency. We don't need to know anything about the specific tags, specific context of that object. We really don't need to do that. And finally, we'll apply it to the build. So once it will collect everything, it will simply overwrite what was defined in this render array. That's it. We don't need to do anything manually. Yeah, so even if we really need to add something like write down a particular tag, we still have a class for this. This is the cache class, and it has also a bunch of utility methods, such as a merge context, which will simply merge the existing context with the new ones. The same goes for building attacks. So, for example, if we would like to build a list of tags for multiple nodes, we can simply take advantage of that particular method. We can also easily invalidate tags. Maybe I will not recommend this particular method because it's a sort of an anti-pattern. In this implementation, it calls statically the cache invalidator service. So I would advise to use that one instead, because you will have probably may have a trouble when writing a test, but still it exists. It will allow us easily to invalidate any cache tag we need. We can also take an advantage of cacheable responses. So what are these? Basically, this is something that you are using in Drupal every day, but you actually don't think about it. When you return a render array from a controller, there is basically a renderer under the hood, which is calling the cache collector, and it collects all the metadata to your build and handles the cache. We can return our JSON response, also cacheable, not just the JSON that is taking again and again with a fresh data by using the cacheable JSON response. The same goes for REST plugins. Here is actually, you know that you should use that only for get methods, because the others are just an operation to update, to create, to delete. So It can be cached, but the get method, of course, from the REST plugin. And when you are going to implement your customs, some sort of a response, you can also use a cacheable response interface, and it will allow to easily, as you can see, add cacheable dependency, as I previously presented to you. So talking about the rendering, why is it important? Just as I said, because yeah, there is a magic behind the scene. How it works. So basically we are starting over here, and there is a lookup on the render API cache first, and of course, if there is a data for that in the cache API, we have a hit and we get the response automatically. But in case we miss that data in the render API cache, we are trying to fetch the HTML, and of course for tweak cache. And here, mainly not experienced Drupal developer, when they turn on the development mode, but they forget about changing in development services YML a configuration for a tweak config, and there is a debug, you should set it to true. Yeah, they are asking why they changed something, but it hasn't changed actually. And they are asking why, and I say because you got the response from a tweak cache. It was compiled. There is a compiled version, so yeah, there is a hit. Here's the output. Yeah, the tweak cache files are stored in the site default files, and there is a PHP directory. Basically, there is a lot of these files. So if you really would like to know something more about them, you can have a look. Yeah, but in case we'll also have no cache data from tweak, we are compiling the tweak and return the output. I will now quickly give you an example. We have a node, and let's say we have in that node a field with paragraphs, and that field has a reference field to the image. So how this usually works, if we simply in a node template we print the content, that's it. So it will go like, you know, like a waterfall. We have a cascade of things. It is going down and down and down from the node to field, the paragraph field, and the image. And it is doing the rendering, and from the below up to the top, during the rendering, it is collecting all the cache metadata. So in this particular case, we are safe. The renderer does the job. It collects all the caching metadata. So whatever will change, for example, in the image, in the paragraph, we are safe. Our node will be refreshed whenever something changes. But what will happen? I saw many times some sort of a magic, you know, like accessing particular field, you know, the first item from that field and the particular field in that paragraph in the context of a node. So what developers are missing in this case is that they're basically interrupting the render pipeline. So when the rendering is break, because it basically from the node context is going to the image context and skipping all of that part, it won't collect all the metadata. So now only maybe something changed directly on the image will be detected, and the node itself will be invalidated. But in case we'll change something in the paragraph, it won't. So is there any solution to that? What should we do? So first of all, do not interrupt the rendering order. That's the right one. You shouldn't be worried that you need to have multiple templates for a field, a paragraph, and so on. That is fine. Let the Drupal does the job. But in case you really must, there are some. I imagine there are some certain circumstances in which it's easier to do it this way. There is a little hack that I also know about from DrupalCamp. I don't know where, but yeah, I remember that. We can pipe our content first through a render pipe. Do we lose the performance because of this? No, it will pass the rendering as I show over here. Yeah, and it will work correctly. And then when we're going to print a particular field, it will have all of the stuff cached. Yeah, because by piping through render, it has to go through all of the steps, like using the render API, compile the tweak, and so on. So I don't think there is any overhead with using that solution, but still I recommend simply to not interrupt the render ordering. Okay, so now we are going to talk a little bit with a poor caching, because we may sometimes struggle with a poor cache implementation. First of all, the cache tags, yeah, they work great. That is true, but we should be cautious. We can't add too many dependencies, for example, to our cache tag, because we will end up with having things actually not cached, like we will set the cache max age 0, because the invalidation happened too often. And yeah, so what's the point? The same goes for sort of generic cache tags. These are, for example, for a list of entities, like the node list. So whenever the node is saved to anything that has a node list, like the view with a list of nodes, it is going to be updated. So the cache needs to be invalidated, rebuilt, and so on. So every time we'll add something very generic to the code. It's also something that can cause some troubles, and because of that reason, Drupal decided some time ago to extend a little bit that kind of a list tags with an addition with a specific bundle, because it simply invalidates data too often, and it was a really serious issue in terms of performance. Yeah, when invalidating, we of course also take into account that we'll have to invalidate only what is needed. Our custom cache tag, maybe some core tag, should have defined the dependencies. So just invalidate it, and the Drupal cache API will handle about the dependencies that will automatically invalidate it, what needs to be invalidated. Yeah, we should also be aware of a cache context. Cache contexts are not a silver bullet. They can be tricky. They work very well for simple combinations, especially like when we use some sort of a boolean. So like a case, a user anonymous or authenticated, because we have only two variations. So the more we have variables to generate that particular cache context, so the more we need to store in our database. And in some, yeah, I'm very bad at math, so I'm not going to explain. Yeah, I just now look maybe smart, but to be honest, I'm very bad. But this is an example from a group module, and they of course define what what it is in this formula, but they simply said that if there is too much group content, maybe it's better to not cache at all, because the context may be too complex, too many variations, and it simply won't be effective. Yeah, and sometimes we don't even know. I heard recently that maybe we'll sort it out because we'll add the cache context of a user. I said great, but it won't work. Why? Because in Drupal we have a thing that is called this is configuration, render auto placeholder conditions, and in here there's defined a list of context that are defined as a poor caching, and these are a user and a session, and it is strictly defined in the code that if there is such a context, do not cache. So yeah, it wasn't a solution. We can't cache by the user because it's treated as not something that should be cached. Anyway, so we should always try to be more granular. So the better we will define what needs to be cached, what will be the context. So the better for us. So it's always better to define, for example, a particular role. Because there will be less variations, so the more generic will have a worst implementation of the cache. Yeah, but as you may know, there are a lot of cache contexts defined in Drupal core, but we can easily add some new ones because we may find a case in which will be better. Maybe it will improve our performance. And to do that sort of implementation is quite straightforward. I will show you in a second. But yeah, we may use that, for example, when we want to cache something from a third-party integration, where we may need some advanced granulation to what is already defined in Drupal. And how we can achieve that? It's very simple. It's a definition of a service. We need to tag it as a cache context. That's it. The next step that we actually need to take is implement a particular interface, define the method, and this return of that method will be used to generate that tag, the dynamically generated tag that I show you at the beginning of this presentation. Yeah, and of course we can also add some dependencies if we will need. Yeah, so for example, a tag, we can imagine we have some sort of a webhook that is calling our endpoint, and whenever it will call our application, we can invalidate it. So yeah, the Drupal will be aware that there was some sort of a change of the context. Yeah, and as I also previously said, we can easily apply it to our render array. Lazy builder. I'm going to introduce the concept of lazy builder. I don't know if you may heard of it. Maybe you heard it, but you haven't used that. Yeah, this is some sort of a solution for case in which we need to have something dynamic, but still we don't want to interrupt the other caching of the site, the parts of the site. So yeah, it's also a solution for not using a max h0 because it will break simply all of the caching. Yeah, so it is useful in case we can't use the tags, context, and so on. And we gain a lot of performance because the site loads. This lazy builder is called by the BigPipe module, so this is happening asynchronous, and it won't make the user wait for a response. The HTML output is rendered. You have an fast page load, and the content is loaded asynchronous. So about the implementation, it's very easy. We just need to define a key lazy builder. That's it. And in it we need to define the callback that is going to be invoked when BigPy was going to render and to put the content in a selected place on the site. Yeah, so once we'll define the callback, we'll do all the rest in our callback, and yeah, so simply that's it. And what actually we can do more in terms of squeezing Drupal to be more performant. The thing that I've learned quite recently, to be honest, because I was developing my contributor module hook to event, and yeah, I fall into trouble when I was the first user entering the site, and I was waiting a lot of time because I have discoveries on the YML files and so on, and it took a lot of time, and I said, oh no, I can't punish the end user to wait so long for things that should be computed some sort of ahead upfront. So there is a hook rebuild, which is called when we are doing a cache rebuild. It's invoked right after all of the cache is cleared from the database. So in case we have some sort of heavy computing on the site, the data that needs to be calculated, and these operations are quite heavy, we can take advantage of that hook, and we can do our calculation over there. And so whenever any of the users will enter the site, yeah, it will be there. It will sit in a cache. Yeah, that's it for a hook, but we can also take advantage of the modules such as a warmer. This is a very good module that allows us to warm up the cache. So it basically is rebuilding on the server side all of the caching, for example, for the entities, right after we clear the cache. So I'm not sure if this even use the queue to rebuild that, but still, if we rebuild immediately on the server side the cache for example, entities that are crucial in terms of performance, we can do that ahead, because the cold boot is heavy and we don't want our user to wait. And as I said, for a hook rebuild, to punish them because they were fast, for example, accessing the content. Yeah, we can simply warm it up. We can tweak the cache bins. I haven't talked about the cache bins, but basically in a Drupal we have things like a bins, so they are basically different data tables in a Drupal for different things. So, you know, if we'll have a single one and a lot of different type of caching and a lot of operation on that particular tables, it will be very difficult for the database engine to work with this efficiently. So it is just chunked up to multiple tables. Yeah, and you may probably not heard about it, but first of all, you can define your own bin if you need. If you have some sort of a specific data that you wouldn't like to, for example, store in the data bin, you can define your own. Drupal has also its default limits for that bin, so it's not like it will hold 1 million of records in the database out of the box. It's not. It's only 5,000 record per table, but you can change it like globally or for a particular bin. Yeah, and when we should pick a particular one, it depends. for example, of a frequency and the freshness of the data. Yeah, the more I believe explain the documentation for that fact. In some scenarios, we may even, yeah, I thought at the beginning that the pizza can get stale, expired. The cache can also be expired, and in Drupal it is implemented this way that but out of the box it won't allow us to take an invalid data. So if something was invalidated during the request, Drupal always tries to fetch a new data. Well, what does it mean? It simply means that it needs to take the connection to the database, fetch the data. The data is transferred through the network because, you know, that is how the web app is communicating with the database. So yeah, back and forth, that takes time. Yeah, but there are some scenarios in which you don't need to care. Maybe no worries, something has changed, but the data are still okay for us. We can pass as a second parameter true, so we will allow invalid, and the data are still over there. They are still in the tables. They are cleared later on, so we have still an access to that data. Finally, drop database. Yeah, but of course not. As you may know, the database is not designed for storing the cache, so it wasn't prepared to be very performant on that matter. And because of that reason, when we have a high traffic on the site, it is a good idea to maybe use a different caching backend. And it is also pretty straightforward in Drupal. We can use, for example, Redis. This is a key value store. So yeah, basically the same thing, but it is designed to store that kind of data. And once we install it, it's just a matter of setting it as a default cache backend. And finally, we must ask ourselves if we are always, in all scenarios, actually are working with a cache, because sometimes people try to cache things, but they actually, this is not something that should be cached. For example, we may have things that should be stored somehow for a user. Yeah, it doesn't need some sort of invalidation, and we have a full control when it should be changed. So for such things, we have a user data storage. We can keep that in the storage that is designed for some sort of a user data. We have things that may be only cached during the request, so there is no need to store it anywhere. We can, yeah, this still lives in a Drupal 9. There is a Drupal static function, and we have also a state API. This is also a storage, so I wouldn't recommend that, but yeah, there are different mechanisms that we can still take advantage of. And the last one, some sort of temporary storages. We have a private temp storage, we have a shared temp storage. So if our data needs to be temporary, we may probably not need it anymore for some time, then yeah, let's use this one. So yeah, basically that's it. Do you have any questions?
A question: if you have a good solution for storing like search queries, like search API, and when this is really maybe not belong, but on a larger site, you have common search queries for the user, and how to warm up this to avoid it first, and keep it.
Yeah, that's a really tough question, to be honest, because I didn't have a chance. So I may not answer to this question. But did you ask how to make it in Drupal, or maybe for the search engines, because I believe they also have some sort of a mechanism that handles it, but I haven't been working with that, so I can tell you, to be honest. One. Okay, thank you, Dan. You can reach me out on Drupal.org, on my email address, and also we can catch up somewhere in the lobby. So thank you very much. Have a great conference.